noisy lake here. So here I am out in the garden. Not a lot of gardening has been done though this winter. Normally I would be out here in the beginning of January starting to prune and do some light cleanup, but none of that was happening this winter. The only thing that we have been doing is cleaning up the snow. We had a lot of snow. But what I wanted to do is sit down today and kind of rant about the weather and all of the things that is doing to us as gardeners, and especially talk about the hardiness zone map that was changed 2 years ago, and if this cold, unusually cold winter is going to change the map again. This is so much better than outside. I'm so grateful to have this nice and cozy and warm space with beautiful plants to talk to you guys. But this video is going to be super casual, kind of stream of consciousness, talk about the weather and all of the climate things that affect us as gardeners. And specifically about that USDA hardiness zone map change that happened 2 years ago. So if you guys remember, 2 years ago, the hardiness zone map was upgraded because they actually did a lot more readings from weather stations and they made it more accurate. And I think more than half of the areas were upgraded to a warmer zone. Some stayed the same, but nobody was downgraded to a colder zone. So in my case, our area was upgraded from zone 6B to 7A. And yes, I have personally noticed that winters became a lot milder, and a little bit about the USDA hardiness zone. So it basically is an average lowest yearly temperature recorded in your area. That is the only data point that creates the hardiness zone. It always kind of bothered me. So for example, if your lowest temperature that was recorded in your area was 0 Celsius, which is very easy. That's the freezing point. It's 0 Celsius, 32 Fahrenheit. It's freezing point. That is the only data point. So they do not count for how many days was it at 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit. Was it swings in temperature? Was it a week of 0 temperature? And then it went up and then it went down. So none of that is counted. Only one data point is recorded, and then they calculate the average over the last 30 years. It used to be 10 years, but then they extended it to 30 years. So this is how your hardiness zone is calculated. What I have been doing ever since the zone change is planting more plants of zone 7A. I wasn't doing that before. I have pushed a couple of plants here and there, but I'm generally not a huge zone pusher because I have a little bit of a microclimate in my garden, and I will talk about microclimates a little bit later in the video. But now I am really worried about the plants that I planted that are either zone 7A or the ones that came from a different climate like the Pacific Northwest. I got some hornbeams that I planted in the fall that came all the way from Oregon. And yes, they are hardy, but because they've been living in such a luxurious, wonderful climate, I am not sure how they're going to survive this winter. They're really hating their life right now. But the way plants work is basically they have antifreeze in their cells. There's certain sugars, protein, amino acids, and I'm not a horticulturalist, so I'm not sure how that works on a cellular level. But I know some of the plants have more protection evolutionary. So some of them that evolved up in the north, like spruces and firs and junipers, a lot of the conifers have a lot of sugars and antifreeze in them, so cold weather doesn't bother them. And the more southern the plant is, the less of those things that they have in their tissues, and their cells literally rupture. And that's why if you plant a plant that is hardy to zone 8 or 8A or B in a zone 6, they just don't have enough of that winter protection in their cells, and their cells rupture and they die. And of course, you can cover your newly planted plants with some protection in their first couple of years of their lives, and not exactly what I did with the mountain laurels that I planted in the fall. Mountain laurels, as a broadleaf evergreen, are especially susceptible to cold winters. What happens is that they have a large leaf surface that keeps evaporating moisture, but the roots are frozen, so they cannot get any water. And they just desiccate. That's why a lot of times you can use anti-desiccant to make sure that you have some sort of protection on the leaves. What I did is I covered them with a paper bags. That's all I had on hand at this point, and I'm just really hoping that they will survive. I also mulched them a little bit extra, which I really hope helps. I'm actually glad that this winter happened now, because I have been working on a couple of projects where our plant installation was postponed from last summer because of some scheduling issues with a contractor until this coming spring and summer. Last year, I sited a lot of plants that were hardy to zone 7A, which was unusual to me. I usually very risk averse with my professional projects because I don't want people to lose plants. But I contacted the breeders to make sure that certain plants like gardenias and camellias were indeed hardy to our new zone 7A, and they confirmed. They said, sure, they will be okay. I am really not certain about it now, so I am glad that I can change that plant list now to a more hardier plant, because I am not going to take a chance with gardenias, honestly, which is too bad because the client really loved the scent and he specifically requested them. So we may just go with a different plant. Here's the interesting thing, and I'm sorry to get a little nerdy about this. I was wondering, does this cold winter changes our zone? So do we actually go back from zone 7A to zone 6B? And it does not. We probably will need another 3 or 4 years of these low temperatures to push us back into the zone 6B. And again, makes no sense, because just one night of really low temperatures can kill off some of the plants that are hardy to zone 7A, but not zone 6B. So I'm not really sure what to do with this information, but I've always been treating the USDA hardiness zone map more like a guide rather than a rule. In fact, when you go online and you start searching certain plants, you will get different hardiness information from different places. And that comes from experience, from the grower's experience, from certain trials, from people who tried them in their own gardens. So the bottom line is, with the hardiness zone map, do not trust it as this Bible, but again, treat it like a guide, an approximate guide of what you can plant in your garden. And I'm sorry if I'm making it even more confusing than it already is, but the bottom line is, it's a very nuanced topic, and I think you should do a lot of research. Also, walk around in your neighborhood and see what plants are doing well. Ask your garden friends, ask your local garden center. A lot of times they will know, because it is not in their favor, especially if they guarantee plants, to sell something that is not hardy to your area. Let's talk about microclimates now. And I love this topic because my own garden has many different microclimates. And what a microclimate is basically an area of your garden where temperature is just different for some reason. A lot of the portion of my sidewalk garden, which is so beautiful in the summer, has a northern microclimate. So plants wake up there very late, probably a week later than any of my neighbors, because it is a northern side of the house and snow and ice just stays there forever and ever. It would be sometime in the spring and everybody else's snow would have melted and we still have little piles of snow because it's the northern side, and we have a lot of shade trees. Even when trees do not have any leaves on them, and we have some of the really big trees like the pin oak and our neighbor's elm, they still create a lot of shade, and snow doesn't melt as quickly, and also the soil doesn't warm up as fast. On the other hand, where the vegetable garden is, that is 100% south facing side, and it warms up so quickly in the spring. I start planting greens out there very early. In fact, I have planted greens out there right now, and I have some arugula and spinach under some covers as we speak, and they're actually alive and they're doing well, which is shocking. Another reason why that space is so warm is because it's right next to the wall of the house. And when the temperature goes down in the middle of the night, the house still gives off a lot of ambient heat and makes that space warmer. And that is one of the reasons why I planted one of my figs there. And it has been doing great. It has not had any frost damage in the last 5 years. It has been producing figs really well. On the other hand, I planted another fig just like that in a northern corner of our garden, and that was purely for experiment, and that fig froze off, I think, the second year. Even with protection, I actually covered it in a frost blanket when we had very cold nights, and it still didn't work. But this guy is happy as a clam. And I actually learned that from my parents who garden in northern Russia, and that was my original garden where I started to garden as a kid. My dad would always plant fruit trees in the southern side of the house because fruit trees just don't do well where they are. They are not 100% hardy. Things like cherries, peaches don't even grow there, but cherries and pears have trouble fruiting. So my dad would have them protected with a wall or something like that. Another thing I learned from my parents is about wind tunnels. I don't really have a lot of examples here, but in their garden, they have the space in between the buildings where northern wind just blows in the fall, winter, and spring. And my dad avoids planting anything there that is susceptible. And he only plants something that is very, very hardy. And it helps to have some sort of a windbreak if you have this wind tunnel situation. So planting an evergreen screen of very hardy conifers, if you live in more of the northern area, helps to break that wind tunnel. I want to mention courtyards because those are interesting. So you know that little garden that I've been working on for the last probably like 4 or 5 years? That is a classic courtyard. And whenever I start working on that garden in the spring, the temperature there is like 10, 15 degrees warmer than anywhere else because it is just surrounded by buildings. So buildings emit ambient heat, plus they trap a lot of warmth. So I was able to plant a lot of plants there that survived the winters with no problem. Now, changing the elevation creates very different microclimates, and I have a crazy example of that. So we have a spot about 10 minutes away from our house where we hike with the dog. And the change in elevation, it's hard to tell, but it's like maybe 50 feet, 70 feet, I'm not sure. But as you go up the hill, the temperature drops by about 5 to 7 degrees, just in 5 minutes. And in the spring, around April time, when all of the leaves start to leaf out, because the road, the way it's built, some of the trees are lower and some of the trees are higher than the road, you will drive through a road where one tree is leafed out and the tree literally 20 feet away is not leafed out. It is the most amazing example of what a microclimate can do. And the trees that are kind of behind leafing out, they would leaf out in about 3 days. Same thing happened in the fall when one side will be totally green and another one will be already golden yellow. When we drive up, the temperature is lower, the wind is colder, and the plants of exactly the same species of trees will be shorter and more stunted. It is just so interesting. But the same thing can happen when you drive down in the valley. So something below sea level, what happens is that the cold air sinks and it just sits there. And a lot of times those places are a lot colder than the surrounding area. Microclimates can also be created by a lot of pavement. I'm sure you've heard of a thing called urban heat island effect, where heat just traps in cities because there's a lot of concrete surfaces, so they hold on to heat. And when you go to the city, it's way warmer than it would be in the suburb. Now, I have a personal experience with something like this. So my friend Patty's garden, which I did a number of garden tours, her garden is on a corner lot. So she literally lives on 3 streets, and there's a lot of asphalt and there's a lot of sidewalks. She lives about a mile away from me, which is not a lot, but her garden wakes up 1 to 2 weeks earlier than mine, and things start to bloom 1 to 2 weeks earlier than mine because she lives in this little heat island. A lot of plants that grow very well in her garden are just not hardy to my garden. So for example, she can overwinter Mexican feathergrass with no problem. It never lives in mine. Her Verbena bonariensis comes back every year. For me, it only started receding a couple of years ago, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to come back this year. Here's one big microclimate driver, and it is a large water body. So if you know somebody who lives next to a lake or next to an ocean, their climate is just different. And big example of that is big leaf hydrangea or hydrangea microphylla. You know, those beautiful blue or pink hydrangeas that we all love so much. Why are they so beautiful in the Cape Cod area? Why does the Cape Cod have Hydrangea Festival every year? Because it is just milder and those buds can survive the winters. Now, interestingly, hydrangea plant itself is very hardy. They could be hardy to zone 5 up to zone 4. So the stems and the roots themselves, super hardy. But their buds really like to be more like in the zone 6B or 7A. And that's why I actually ripped out my microphylla hydrangeas that are not reblooming variety because they were just getting nooked. Every winter I would just not get blooms because their buds would just freeze off because I am a little bit too far from Atlantic Ocean. I'm about an hour away. And then there are small microclimates that you can create in your own garden, like raised garden beds, warm up a lot faster, but also rocks. If you have a rock garden or alpine garden, you know that the rocks trap heat and then they give it off in the middle of the night. Or when spring comes, they warm up a lot faster and plants start to grow a lot faster in rock garden areas. So people have been using and creating microclimates for centuries, like growing certain plants in courtyard gardens or creating windbreaks and planting certain trees right next to the wall. You see those espaliered figs that are protected from cold, and growing certain plants where they can benefit from the warmth of a large water body. Now, what does it have to do with my garden? What I decided is that I think I'm going to go back to only planting plants of zone 6B. I just cannot take the heartache of losing plants. And once in a while, I can zone push or create a microclimate or plant something in a more protected area, like this new garden that I've been working on with the stone walkway. It is actually southern exposure, wind protected, so I can take risks there. But I know for a fact on the northern side of my garden, zone 7 plants just will not make it, and even some of the plants of zone 6B may not make it, so it's a straight zone 6A. After living here for 23 years, I know my garden well. I know what areas can take certain plants, so I think that's what I'm going with from now on. And especially in my professional projects, I think I'm going to stick with plants of a zone 6B because I don't want my clients risking losing plants. And yes, if they want a certain plant, if they want a gardenia or camellia, we can plant it with protection, again, maybe in a little bit of a microclimate if they have a courtyard situation. But I'm not sure what I'm going to do in the beginning of my video because, as you guys know, in the first 30 seconds, I usually put up New Jersey Garden Zone 7B or 6A. That's what I used to do. So do I go back to 6B after using 7A for 2 years? I don't know. And this is what gardening is. This is what weather is. It's constantly changing and we kind of have to adapt and change with it. But we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen after this winter. I really hope all of the things that I planted last fall survive because I gave them some protection, and we actually had quite a bit of snow, which is great. Snow is a great insulator. I think if we didn't have snow, I would not be as optimistic. But anyway, you guys, let me know what you think about this whole USDA change, about the weather we've been having. How is your weather? Maybe your weather is absolutely fine. And I hope you enjoyed this rant. It wasn't too much and you learned something new, and I will see you in the next video.